something new, or is it something which is actually just a small modification? Many people are also saying that we're actually going back to the older times now, back to the pre-pandemic world, that people are now adjusting, that corona might not have been over, but the fear associated with the virus has actually gotten down. And so people are actually resuming their lives like before. So is new normal real? What is this new normal? Nalini has been actually thinking about it, theorizing about it, talking about it, and also it reflects in her practice in Nepal. And this is also continuation of our association at a transnational level with communities, and they're doing wonderful activities there, which we would also be listening to in greater detail. So, Nalini, over to you. What exactly is this new normal, and what is your idea of this new normal? Just help our audience and all of us to understand your understanding of this new normal.
Thank you, Akriti, for having me today. Well, we have been through a lot ever since, like the COVID pandemic has hit all of us, right? And as a global community, we have been shaken, we have been shut down, and we have been transformed. And like commutes have disappeared. I have stopped going to my workplace since March 2020, and it's almost like 6 months now. And like ways of working has reinvented. Most of us have adopted or still struggling to adopt work from home, and lifelong behaviors has also changed for the first time. For example, like the daily routine of our lives is like has altered since this pandemic. Our habits, habits, priorities, and needs have all shifted. The things that mattered to us pre-COVID situation is different to what is more important today. And today we are trying to cope with the situation, and most of the people call it as the new normal. Now, if we look into the data in one of the social networking apps, Instagram, you will find the term new normal has been used more than 3 million times. And the term new normal 2020 has been used more than 2 lakh times alone. And it's like, it's all over newspaper, it's all over articles, it's all over series. Everybody is talking about the new normal globally. And today I'm here also to speak about this new normal, not because it's a trend or it's the most happening word, but because the term new normal has become a part and is existing within the society. And that's my concern. I come from a social work profession that, tries to promote social change and social unity, social development. We talk about empowering the people, liberation of the people. So I felt the need to understand, or rather, unpack the new normal, because it's present in our ecosystem and we must know what it is. And I also believe that it has great potential to influence individual, group, or society as a whole. So to understand this new normal, I have used the theory of change by Kurt Lewin. Now, this theory I consider to be apt to discuss this term new normal, because new normal, like the theory, is associated with the change. So for Lewin, the process of change involves 3 stages. Firstly, it's creating the perception that the change is needed, and then moving towards the new desired behavior or the change that is required. And finally, solidifying the new behavior as a norm or standard. So I would like to share my screen with you to show the theory. Yeah.
Sure.
So, yeah. So using Lewin's 3-stage model of change, first we are in the unfreezing stage, when we are creating the perception for the need of change. Then we slowly move to the change. What change? What are the desired change we require? Then after that, we move to the refreeze, when we make this change permanent. And then only we can say that we have reached the new normal, when we reach, when we make the change permanent, then we can say that we have reached the stage of new normal. Just a minute. So, during when coronavirus, first started in Wuhan in December 2019, people in countries like our countries, like in India and Nepal, like we were like very less worried, and we took the social distancing measures as a break from work. We took it as a break from school or daily routine to stay home with pay. And in the initial phase, all of us waited and planned to continue our work only after this coronavirus is over. For example, my college where I work decided to continue classes after everything gets settled down with this pandemic. But just like the genie won't go back to the bottle, coronavirus is not going back to Wuhan. So on May 14th, WHO warned the coronavirus may never go away. So that is when most of us, entered the stage of unfreezing. It made us flexible, it made us realize the need for change, and we cannot continue to wait for corona to go away. So I believe we have all passed the stage of unfreezing, and now we are at the stage of the change. Now the change involves moving towards the new desired, or a new direction of change. It involves planning and implementing the change. The change that has become more evident right now in terms of education system, in terms of jobs, in terms of migration, in terms of industries, then of course tourism and mental health, there's travel, environment, and also change is evident in terms of consumption and production and many more. For example, in terms of change in regards to my college, we also decided to start work with online classes because we realized we needed this change. So the change has put us all focus on, the change has also put us to focus on being self-reliant. This pandemic, which has taught us to, to keep social distancing, to self-quarantine, to self-isolation, it has also made us realize how important it is to become self-reliant. And recently, on the occasion of 74th Independence Day, the Prime Minister also said that, ask the citizens to prepare for self-reliant India. And when we reflect to Gandhiji's local self-reliance concept, we see that the integrated rural development was the key ingredient to self-reliant. So I fundamentally agree that the community development, a community building, plays a vital role in the process of making the individual self-reliant. So keeping in mind how important is self-reliant, I have also started an initiative called Shifa Community.
Right. So I think we would love to hear more about how in your personal experience you have actually converted this kind of a crisis into an opportunity. But before that, Nalini, I wanted you to stress on something which is again your area of expertise. Because like you're saying, this whole idea of self-reliance became very important. But at the same time, it was the pandemic also exposed uh, so much. Like, for example, how inadequate our health infrastructure was, or for example, how large population in our country or in our subcontinent actually is absolutely incapable of taking care of themselves. So the role that the state should have played, for example, in the protection was very inadequate. So how do you actually uh, understand in terms of how this big challenge was catered to at a community level in terms of responding to a crisis like this? And I would like you to quote your study and example from the children of sex workers, because it's a vulnerable community that you've been working with closely. And again, like we were also quite involved in terms of relief work. And when we were dealing with sex workers, for example, since that's why I picked up this particular case, is because again, it's part of your PhD work. And we found that they were very, very apprehensive to show their ID cards to even get ration, because that would, because the illegality that is associated
True.
with their work. And the other
Mhm.
thing was that even their profession completely, which is
Mhm.
already stigmatized, got
Mhm.
further stigmatized because of this whole idea of social distancing and all. And then
Mhm.
you're looking at, children of sex workers. So through this example, we could actually understand how what happened to the range of vulnerable sections that
Mhm.
we've been talking about in Pegam as well,
Mhm.
and are also catering to. So what were your observations and findings from your work on that particular section?
Okay. First, I would like to address on the health issue that you have taken out. See, India, when we talk about the population, we are 1.2 billion population. And when we talk about the population of Nepal, there are 29 million population in Nepal. So, but the vaccine for coronavirus has to be there for 7.8 billion population, right? So in terms of talking about, the healthcare facilities in the larger level, uh, everybody is facing crisis. The medical industry is facing crisis, because until and unless we do not get the vaccine, that also in a massive amount, it is difficult. But coming to a small community level, to my community, let's take for example to my community, what we have started doing is that we have started sanitizing our own area by the community people. And in our community we have 3 homestays. Out of we have we Akriti, am I audible?
Yeah, yeah. I think we are. Shivam, if you could just put your mic on mute. I think there's a small glitch.
Yeah,
You please continue, Nalini. I think 1 second. I'll just,
it's okay. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, talking about the health measures in our community, we have 3 homestays in our community, and one of the homestay has been put up as a quarantine facility. So that is how the community people, we are responding to the crisis, or rather, we are taking this not as a challenge, but then we ourselves, we are creating this quarantine facility, a proper quarantine facility within the community, for the
Mm,
community, right?
mm.
Now, talking about the sex workers, the children of sex workers, they were already vulnerable even before the pandemic. And af- and during the time of pandemic, they have become even more vulnerable in terms of everything. When we look into the child of a sex worker, keeping the child in the center and looking at the environment around the child, looking at the primary and secondary level of socialization, everything has been affected. And that affected that relation, that affected relation, definitely hampers the children of sex workers. For example, about their education, education itself was a big problem. Accessing education itself was a big problem for these children of sex workers because of their identity. And now things have come up like online education. I don't know how will they get the opportunity to access online education. And even if they get the opportunity to access online, I'm sure they will not come up to a video call and then have a conversation with the teachers, fearing about exposing their identity. Because when I was doing my PhD in the red light area in Siliguri, where there were around like 515 sex workers, and there were number of almost like 30 number of children. And these children did not want to take the pictures in the initial phase when I was conducting case studies and group work with them, because they feared that taking the picture, I might show it to others, and maybe their identity could be exposed.
Yeah.
So I'm sure
Yeah.
because of their identity and because of this COVID pandemic, they have become even more vulnerable in terms of education, in terms of health, and in terms of everything, Akriti.
Right. So, you also mentioned about the impact on education, right? Not
Mm-hmm.
just of these children of sex workers, but in general, if you look at the shift that has happened towards the online. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the biggest challenge that we're facing right now is not everybody have those many gadgets or those many
Mm-hmm.
smartphones. So
Mm-hmm.
now it is like on the ambit of RTE to be able to, also the right to education, which says that if we are shifting our modes of education, then it's the state that has to provide for uh, even the infrastructure for all
Mm-hmm.
such activities. So what kind of challenges in the education field are we actually looking at in this shift towards in the transition towards the
Mm-hmm.
new normal? And
Uh,
I'm
s-
talking about technology and education both. What kind of
yeah.
transitions have you observed? Yeah.
See, Akriti, there's a big digital divide. There's a big digital divide for me today also. To come to online for a conversation with you because my Wi-Fi is not very good. I've asked my neighbor's Wi-Fi connection to just to come online with you. See, I being a professor teaching in college, I have such problem. Just imagine the students who are from rural areas, how will they come up? These are the challenges that they're facing. But then Akriti, I would also, look into the opportunity because, like, there are people, sitting in homes, they are accessing various skills and knowledge through online education. But then again, there's going to be like just like the Marxist theory, the rich ones is going to be richer and the poor ones it's getting poorer. There's going to be big disparity, and which for long term is not good. Which for long term, it's a very bad impact to the society as a whole. So talking about the challenges of education, I see, the major thing that we see is the digital divide. Now, people may say that, it's not been very long since the phone were invented, and people started using phones in India. But nowadays, most of them, they carry 2 to 3 phones. They might say that. So, and they might also say that because one of the webinar that I attended talking about, they spoke on the education, the system and digital divide. So they said that very soon, if you start online education, the students from the rural villages, they might have cell phones with them, and then they might have access to education. But having a cell phone does not let you access to education. What about the internet facility? What about the geographical condition in India? There's landscapes, you need to climb trees and mountains to connect to Wi-Fi. So how are these, students going to access to education? That is really a big concern.
So, is there any government's efforts in this direction to create more connectivity and reach? Because there are tall claims that rural electrification has reached 90%, or maybe you know. So, what is
Mhm.
actually the ground reality? Because you also come
See,
from
yeah.
remote areas where it's very difficult to connect. You're also connected to a lot of people in Darjeeling, northeast parts of
Mhm.
those parts of West Bengal. And so this is that kind of a terrain which is not just secluded and isolated from the rest of the country culturally, but also in very physical senses as well. And that's the reason why there's so much of gap. So you
Mhm.
have worked on these issues also. So what have been in this current times of post-COVID challenges, the government's emphasis on these areas? Have there been any? And if yes, what kind?
See, I'm very sorry to say about the government initiative towards this, but then, talking about the ground level reality, talking about the villages, yeah, schools have closed down. People are not, into education. They're not really focusing on like the curriculum or what they must study at their age. So that that will help in their development. They're not worried about that, and like they have been totally disconnected to the mainstream. the schooling education, because of course the challenges, of course, because of the access to, the technology, the internet connection, all these are hampering towards the access of education. And recently the government has come up with this 5+3+3+4 curriculum, right? The new education
Yeah.
policy talks about
Yeah.
that. It would have been better if the new education policy would talk about, giving internet to all these villagers, providing, so that the students and even the teacher, if this not a national education policy talks about, even the teachers should be assessed by 2023, for the teachers assessment to the teachers in the village, they need internet facility. I think government should
Right.
look into that aspect. That is what the ground reality needs it.
Correct. So I think you have also worked a lot on gender issues, and I think at this point it's good to also look at the opportunities that you've identified, and you've not just looked at them normatively, but you've actually gone on the field yourself and tried to use this kind of a challenge and a crisis situation to actually mobilize people on ground and try to convert this into an opportunity. So I would really want you to share with all of us the initiative that you've picked up, because in Pegam, we are also wanting to kind of amplify uh, efforts of the kind, social efforts that are actually trying to put together the values that you stand for. So the example that how community actually took up the role of creating a quarantine center and then providing locally the health infrastructure, which is completely lacking, is a very good example. But what is exactly your initiative that you've brought women together, and what have you done so far, and what are your plans for the future? Because I think there are many people who can actually draw inspiration from efforts like yours.
Well, this Shifa community is a group of youth, especially girls, and they are the members of this initiative. So this Shifa community started informally from the month of July, and it's
This
very
year
young.
itself.
Yeah, it's very young indeed, right?
Mm.
So with an objective to develop the community and make it self-reliant and self-sustainable. So how are we going to make a community self-reliant and self-sustainable, right? So we have chosen the method called ABCD, that is assessed-based community development. So it is a method for the sustainable development of communities based on the strengths and potentials. So it involves assessing the resources, skills, and experiences that are available in a community and organizing the community around issues that move its members into action. So the first step or the first task for Shifa community was to identify assets or resources that is existing within the community. So we did a little bit of, the asset mapping, the resource mapping in the community, and we have come under, resources mapping. We have done, and we have come under four broad categories of resources. One is individuals as resources, institutions as resources, local products as resources, and association as resources. So coming to individual, as resource, we have identified, like, the nurses, the plumbers, the electricians, the taxi drivers, because, in our village, in our community, most of us don't have vehicles to move out. So in case of emergency, we thought it is necessary to have those taxi drivers numbers in case, we need an emergency at night. And we have identified carpenters, school teachers, voluntary social workers, and we have also identified individual working in panchayat office. Now, this is the most important resource we have identified under individual, because this helps us to bridge between the government, the local self-government, and the community. Uh, Let's take an example, a recent example. Some of the people of the community required a residential certificate for this upcoming job that they were applying. And within a short time, this person called up the resource person. This community people called up the resource person and got the residential certificate within a very short notice of time. And the community people acknowledged that this happened for the first time, because you know how the local government works. So this itself is a success, I consider as a
Yeah.
success. Yeah. And we have also identified like elderly people with unique skills and experiences as resource person in our community. Like in our village, we have identified two old beautiful women, and one who has been involved in knitting ever since she was in her school days, and recently she has volunteered to teach group of young women, to make their livelihood. And the other one is a storyteller, and most of the kids of 1980s and 1990s in the community have not grown up. That time there were no lights, there were no